So I'll tell you a funny story. So I am a legal coach for the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce in New Jersey. So sometimes during these conversations, we'll get an intake form and it basically says client prefers to speak in Spanish or client prefers to speak in English. And sometimes we don't have that. So sometimes if it doesn't say anything or it doesn't, I just start automatically speaking it in English. So this one time a few months ago, I had the whole call and it was just basically explaining some different, it's more education. It's, of course, it's education, not advice. So I explained these regulations and these topics in English. And at the end of the conversation, I said, bueno, fue un gusto hablar con usted, which means just, okay, well, it was great speaking to you. And he was like, wait, you speak Spanish? And I was like, yeah, yes, I thought you knew. He was like, oh my gosh, why'd you make me have that conversation in English? We could have done this in Spanish. So I thought that was super funny because in my mind, I didn't see anything in the intake form that he wanted to speak in Spanish. And I just automatically assumed that we were okay to speak in English and he wanted me to speak to him in English. So with that said, now sometimes when I get on these calls, I said, I love speaking Spanish. I'm okay to speak in English or Spanish. What would you prefer? And they'll say, "Oh, Spanish, you speak Spanish. Great, let's speak in Spanish." So I bring this up and I think it's always going to vary and it's never going to be the same. I won't say that I have the same exact sort of framework that I use every single time. I kind of gauge it on a case by case basis because it gets a little complicated because there is sort of like you don't want to offend anyone. And you just really want to see what their preference is in language. Do they want to speak to you in Spanish and English? You don't want to make any assumptions about language or your intentions. I think if they know that your intentions are good, sometimes we have entire legal conversations in Spanish, and I'll ask them, was that okay? Is my Spanish, pretty good in my legal Spanish? Okay. And they'll say, oh, yes, it's great. So, I think if they know your intentions are not to be offensive, it just does really well and they're appreciative and they're kind of thankful. But I will say Matthew's experience is different, right? So I care a lot about not offending anyone, assuming that they don't speak English well enough to speak to me and that's why I'm switching over to Spanish. But I think it's different for a non-Latino lawyer, right, Matthew?
Yeah, so I was laughing. I also care about not offending people, but interestingly, I think when I get someone who is a native Spanish speaker or a native Portuguese speaker, um, for me to start speaking in their language is an icebreaker. It makes them feel more comfortable and more trusting, because I care as an American to actually reach out and express that. I probably have had some kind of feel awkward, maybe in the sense that they would prefer to speak English and they don't understand why I'm speaking their language to them. But most of the time, I would say the response is, "Oh, that's very nice that he cares to actually, express himself even to some small degree in my language instead of his language."